you don't want to miss something. Like maybe you have this life insurance that you paid up 25 years ago and you kind of forgot about it because it's a whole life and you can't tell that your parents were paying a premium on it. But if they have it written down, then you know where to go look for it, sort of thing. So it just really organizes those things. And then we talk about setting goals. How do we want to pass things? Do we want to pass things? Maybe we want to pass it to a charity. Maybe we want to sell everything before then. Bigger than a net worth. You know, a lot of people do a net worth every year, but this would be bigger than that. And so looking at that, thinking what the goals are, and then that's when you're ready to set your legal plan. And so going to have that conversation, talk to your tax person first, talk to your financial advisor, then go to your attorney so that you can go in there and say, here's our goals. This is what we'd like to do. Tell us how we can best make this happen.
In the literal sense, estate planning is the process of arranging your affairs to meet your objectives regarding the use, conservation, and disposal of your property. However, a K-State Research and Extension Family Resource Management agent says it's also a gift that you can give to your family. On today's Sound Living, the keys to estate planning. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Renae Riedy, the Family Resource Management and Wellness Agent for the Chisholm Trail District, which includes Dickinson and Marion counties, is working on new extension publications to make the estate planning process easier to understand and to get set up. Renae, first off, maybe just some background on what we consider to be estate planning.
So some of the things that I think about with estate planning that until I started doing the research I hadn't really thought about is maybe just starting with people think about estate as tangible things like titled assets, house, car, land, business, etc. But there's some things in estate planning that we really should think about just as soon as we have a child maybe that's 18 or someone turns 18. And those pieces of estate planning would be the advanced healthcare planning. And so going ahead and setting up a durable power of attorney for financial, for medical. You might think, well, I'm 18, I don't have very many things. But this is an opportunity for you to make a decision about whatever you have. And some of that is your health care, signing HIPAA forms. So you're determining who has permission to know these things. So that's one piece that until I started doing this research, I had never really put those two things together. But it is one really big piece.
In terms of people in the community who might be able to help develop the estate plan, who should we be looking to?
Well, often people right away think about those assets that we just talked about. And with that, a lot of times that you've got to work with an attorney because you would want to make sure things are absolutely legal because unfortunately, sometimes wills and estate planning are contested. And so you would want to make sure you're working with somebody that absolutely knows.
So this would be something where you may have to do a cash outlay, but it would certainly be worth it, I would think, in the long run.
Absolutely, to make sure that your wishes are upheld in the way that you thought. And if you do nothing, or even if you just do a will, and a will can just be signing it, having it witnessed, that's filed, you go into a process called probate. And that can be quite costly and lengthy. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if you're prepared and you go in and you know what to ask an attorney, you'll be able to minimize your costs.
You talked about the preparing. So what's the development here? How do we get to this plan?
Yeah. So we've recently updated a fact sheet beginning the estate planning process. It's an overview. And in that overview, it talks about kind of the steps you can take. Within that set of documents as well on the KSRE bookstore, there is a terms page. There's what your attorney should know. What are your goals? All of those sheets can be utilized as well. But looking at our updated overview that we did and terms page, it will help you outline the things that you need in order to get started in the process.
Let me put you on the spot here. You talked about terms, and I'm assuming that we've got the terms in here because they can be confusing or just things we're not familiar with. So what are some of the terms that we maybe should be familiar with?
Sure. So a lot of people think about if I'm going to an attorney, I'm going to have a will, I'm going to have a trust. There's lots of different trusts. There's lots of different things to do with that. Some terms that have come to light that might be different ways to plan your estate versus having a trust would be payable on death, transferred on death deeds. Those are things I think people definitely need to become more aware of. A step-up in basis would be another one. That's another decision that people can make that helps reduce your capital gains later. After it's been passed, sometimes people will say, I'm just going to put my children on my house. Well, they will lose that opportunity for that stepped-up basis. There's other ways around it maybe, but maybe not as easy as you get this increase without having to pay those capital gains.
Tax implications is really big here, isn't it? Especially if you're maybe a farmer or a rancher.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This gives you an opportunity to do some pre-planning. It gives you an opportunity to set up how you want things to happen. Maybe you want to set up something that will help take care of you until you pass, and then you're able to pass those assets, utilizing some of those tax tools.
What then should be included in the estate plan?
So in our overview, we kind of outline some steps. And so what we talk about is just beginning the conversation. So whether that's with a spouse, can be with maybe the heirs that may get that. It might be with your attorney or your tax preparer. So you start that conversation, and then you move on to those advanced directives, that healthcare planning that everybody needs to do, set up a basic will. And then we start talking about getting organized. Maybe in my head, I know all the accounts I have, all those things that I have, but I don't have it in writing. So if somebody else needed to take care of those things, that would be really, really important. So we have a document within the bookstore that's called our valuable records. And that's a way that people can just start to write those things down. Some of the things when I was part of this committee a few years ago, we start to think about what do we want to do with the digital assets? What do we do with social media accounts? There's lots of things that have kind of evolved over the last 20 years that maybe we didn't even think about. That could be intellectual property even. And so that will help to start that conversation. That'll help to start writing all of those things down. So you can really get a good look at everything without, maybe it's in your head or maybe it's in your computer, but if nobody can get into your computer, they're not going to be able to move things forward. And then you don't want to miss something. Like maybe you have this life insurance that you paid up 25 years ago and you kind of forgot about it because it's a whole life and you can't tell that your parents were paying a premium on it. But if they have it written down, then you know where to go look for it, sort of thing. So it just really organizes those things. And then we talk about setting goals. How do we want to pass things? Do we want to pass things? Maybe we want to pass it to a charity. Maybe we want to sell everything before then. Bigger than a net worth. A lot of people do a net worth every year, but this would be bigger than that. And so looking at that, thinking what the goals are, and then that's when you're ready to set your legal plan. And so going to have that conversation, talk to your tax person first, talk to your financial advisor, then go to your attorney. Because generally people do have to work with an attorney in one way or another. Not always. Sometimes there's situations where that can be bypassed, particularly if you've taken care of things ahead of time. But going ahead and establishing that relationship, letting them know what your goals are, referencing back to those beginning the estate planning process documents that we already have out there, those fact sheets, so that you can go in there and say, here's our goals. This is what we'd like to do. Tell us how we can best make this happen. And so then after creating that legal plan, it's how much you want to share. It does give the people who are left behind some peace of mind. If they know some work has been done, they know to look. And also then just thinking about some of the decisions after a death have to happen pretty quickly. And so if someone has written out what we've been calling a letter of last instruction or something like that that says, hey, I've made funeral plans here, or this is who I want to use, some of those things, it can be even just as simple as that. I have this is this, and then when that time comes, this is where you go find all the rest of the information. It can be as simple as that.
Yeah, sometimes people don't even know that they have a pre-selected, prepaid plot.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And when you're in that, even if it's something that you kind of saw coming, most people still are so much in the grief piece of that it would be hard to think logically, actually, sometimes, that you would think, oh, well, of course that, or maybe your loved one said, well, I want this, but they told somebody else, well, I want this. And if you have it all written out and here's where it is, then it just kind of takes some of the uncertainty out of it.
Yeah, it does seem like a lot of this adds some peace of mind for the family members.
Absolutely. I tell people who come in to see me that this is a gift, really, that they're getting to choose. Because if people don't do something with the estate planning, there is a plan for them. And if you're in the state of Kansas says this is how it works otherwise. So either you can be in control of that plan, or what is in the law books for the state of Kansas will be what your estate plan is.
You mentioned financial advisor a couple of times, and I'm assuming that some people maybe think, well, I don't really have all that much. I don't need a financial advisor. Maybe that's something that we need to get past and think of them as really an asset, someone who can really help us make those good decisions.
Absolutely, particularly when you're thinking about the taxation piece of that. Or if you're going to sell an asset and you need a place to put that money that's more liquid. That would be another whole topic probably in terms of that. But if I were thinking about choosing a financial advisor, I'd be thinking about somebody who's fee-based, particularly because they're not trying to sell you something necessarily. You're paying them for their advice. And so if I was going to select one, that's what I would look at first for some of that advice. But you may have a trusted banker. But again, you really just have to be conscientious of what's somebody trying to sell you, I think, in those instances.
If you are the executor of an estate, are there some things that you need to know?
Sure. So we've created a checklist that's kind of just a baseline to kind of help people navigate those first few months. Some of that is you should be thinking in a fiduciary sort of sense, and that means that you have to put the wishes and the best interest of the person that you are providing that service for, in essence, paid or unpaid. You have to put them first. And so if there's ever any question about that from maybe the other potential heirs, that could cause you a lot of legal issues later. And so just being very transparent, making sure you're doing the things you need to do as the person requested, getting that, hopefully, maybe they have already an asset list so you know what to secure at the beginning. Those sort of things would be helpful, I think. And it's okay if somebody says, hey, I'd really like you to be the executor. It's okay to say no.
And I'm assuming this is something that, again, we would want that communication between family members to know that sometimes it's the oldest brother, the oldest sister, that they are the executor so that everyone knows what's going to happen?
Absolutely. That could be conversation, certainly ahead of time. There are situations where they just sort of appoint themselves because no one's been appointed. Certainly the legal system can appoint that as well. There's just a lot of trickiness in this sometimes. Sometimes every child, if there's a child involved, every one of them becomes an heir. And so they're an heir, but also they may be the executor. And you can maybe divide and conquer some of those things then. So I think just having that communication, just even if it's just a little bit at the beginning, and maybe understanding the why. If you do choose the oldest brother or whatever, maybe that's something that the parents then can explain. Well, here's the why. And then it's not, I don't know why they didn't choose me, and he's not doing it, how I would do it sort of thing. Maybe it'll help reduce some conflict, but it might not.
This is a process, and I'm assuming that depending on how complicated the estate is, this could run on for a while?
Absolutely. I think sometimes people want to settle everything just right away. They're checking things off the list. We've taken care of the final burial. We've done this. But a lot of times it does take some time because and a lot of times you have to wait on death certificates to come for one thing. That's going to delay the process just a little bit. You have things you can be doing between now and then, certainly. But there's nothing that's quick about this unless you have certain circumstances where you've done some work ahead of time where things just transfer in a beneficiary form and a transfer on death deed form, something like that, and depending on the size of the estate.
And you may need far more death certificates than you realize.
And that could happen, absolutely. If you work with a funeral home or something like that, they'll kind of help guide you through that piece. So sometimes people have had more than what they needed. You can always order more as well.
The executor sometimes can be paid. Is this something that is an agreement between the person who has the estate and the person they name as the executor?
That could be, absolutely. And often it needs to be written in some form, whether that's within a trust, whatever legal document they create, could be the will as well. Sometimes it's an outside entity. Sometimes it's a bank or a trust company. And so then the situation is different. They know up front this is what it's going to cost. Sometimes it's a percentage of the estate. It could just be this is our flat rate or it's so much per hour.
So this is another thing you have to decide is who will actually oversee your estate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would also encourage people to have a contingent executor as well, just in case the person maybe isn't able to or just can't when that time comes. Their health might not be good. There could just be a lot of reasons. But that way it also doesn't leave it in flux. Well, if this one, sort of created an order of, well, if they're not able to or they don't want to, there's someone else that would be another option.
I see this as a living document. Is this something that the people need to revisit and take a look at it? Maybe not every year, but at least every couple of years?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've had sometimes people come and talk to me and say, well, I did this about 10 years ago or whatever. And I'll just call my attorney and they'll say, everything's fine. Well, I would encourage you to actually go through and read your documents again. Things do change. You may change your mind. You may lose a beneficiary. There's just lots of things, lots of reasons why you may add a beneficiary. That could be something else that could happen. And so you would want to keep looking at it continuously. So yes, absolutely.
That's Renae Riedy, the Family Resource Management and Wellness Agent for the Chisholm Trail District, with information on the keys to estate planning and the steps to follow when a loved one passes. To learn more about managing family finances, contact your county or district extension office. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.